Hey guys, it's Lisa with Are You My Cousin? And it is time for another Facebook Live. So I hope you guys can join me. And today we are going to obviously talk about genealogy, and we are going to talk a bit more in depth on a recent article I wrote about how to find your ancestors' date of death. Interestingly enough, this is a question I got asked a lot. I've been asked a lot recently over when I was at Roots Tech, as people were sharing some of their frustrations with genealogy research. I've received more emails recently about finding a date of death for an ancestor. And I think, because it is one of the big pieces of our ancestors' lives we want to find. It is kind of one of those big pieces we want to find. And it's not always a straightforward date to find. And sometimes we have to just infer those dates of death. I've written about them before, but I really kind of wanted to talk a little bit more today about how to find those dates of death and give you some experiences that some of my readers and some of the folks who were at some of my talks recently have shared with me, because I thought they were really great ideas and new to me, because I think we learn from each other, certainly as we go through our genealogy research process. Now, if you are joining me, a couple of things. I would want to say welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm glad you are here with me today. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I do see those pop up, and I will answer your questions as we go. If you're watching a replay, or if you are watching this on YouTube, go ahead and put those questions in there, because I do monitor those. If you are watching the replay of this Facebook Live on YouTube, just know that any comments or any references I make to links that I put in the comments, they will be in the description below. So it'll be in the YouTube description below the videos. So that's where you'll find any links that I mentioned. I do try to make sure I get all of those there for you. Now, we're going to talk about finding dates of death. And as you guys know, I am primarily a US-based researcher. That does not mean that when we're talking about these different places to find these dates, that it only applies to US researchers or North American researchers. If you are an international researcher, whether you currently live somewhere outside the US, whether you are just happen to be doing your genealogy research outside of the US, absolutely the principles will still apply. And so it just may be that it's known documents or sources might be known by a different name in a different country, or there just might be a whole different set of records, but it can hopefully get you thinking. If you are a non-US or North American researcher, I would love for it as we talk, if you think of some really great resources for people for those particular countries. So for instance, if you're a UK researcher and you know some really great resources for UK dates of death to find those, pop them in the comments, because again, we can learn as we go with each other, and it will help me out and hopefully help other listeners out as well. So would love to do that and just kind of grow that database for all of us. So before I start, I will tell you I'm going to pop into the chat just a link to that recent post and article I wrote on the website. And then let's get started talking about where to find that ancestor's date of death. Now, typically, there's some very traditional places that we think of looking at, and I'm just going to touch on those because I really would rather spend time on things where we don't normally think to look. But we, as genealogy researchers, we're looking at death certificates. We're looking at the family Bible. We're listening to oral history. We're looking at church records. And then certainly if we can find a tombstone or a gravestone. What I will have to tell you, you've got to be very careful with some of these records. For instance, the death certificate. The date of death is typically pretty good, because usually it's the medical doctor who's writing that down. The other information, as we know, may not always be accurate. Same thing with gravestones, guys. I was hearing more and more stories about this. Those gravestones are good sources, but be careful. Make sure you can verify it somewhere else, because one thing I want you to think about is sometimes gravestones were not placed until a number of years. It could be a significant number of years after the death of the person. Memories fade. Maybe it was not even somebody who knew that particular relative well, or even at all, but they, as part of their family, wanted to go ahead and put this gravestone there. The other thing is, gravestones are expensive. And if mistakes happened, they were not always corrected right away. So because of the expense that would have been involved. So verify those someplace else and just recognize that they may not be exactly accurate. Again, like with everything, we tend to try to verify multiple sources if we have any question about things. And of course, when I mention oral history, be very careful. You'll see in the post that I wrote, I made some assumptions based on oral history. It was very early in my research, and it caused me to not find a date of death for many, many years. Don't do what I did. That's not a good thing. All right. So what are some other places that you can look besides those kind of more traditional records? Absolutely, you can look in military records. So if particularly, even in pension records, so if a soldier or veteran was receiving a pension, you can look to see when that stopped. Sometimes they'll give you a specific date of death, or maybe they'll say payment stopped as of this month and this year due to death of the soldier. So you can see those, you can see it there. Certainly if you died in service, you'll typically find it in the service record. Widow's pension record. So if the widow or surviving widow is applying for a pension, even if it could be a few years out after the death, you can see perhaps when your ancestor died. Again, it may be a very specific date. It just may be an approximate date depending on the information and how much is there, but you can find that as well. If you are looking for a female's date of death, don't discount looking at those pension records or surviving widow's pension applications, because maybe the widow who is applying for that pension application could be the second or third wife. Well, part of her thing is she has to prove that she is married to the gentleman and that she would be deserving of the pension. And so she has to sometimes prove when she got married and perhaps even prove when the previous wife died. So sometimes you can get dates on previous wives in a successive wife's pension application. So be sure and check those out, because they do have a lot of information in them as well. Newspapers, absolutely. Look in newspapers. Obituaries. People often come to me and tell me, Lisa, I can't find an obituary, and they're looking, early kind of records. And a lot of times it wasn't the everyday average citizen who was getting an obituary done. It tended to be a little bit later. I have heard, I cannot confirm this, that obituaries for the average person, didn't really start catching on until after Queen Victoria time period. So hold that with a grain of salt. If your ancestor was of some status in the community, if he or she was famous, you're more likely to see an obituary earlier on for that person. So, I've got some comments. So let me go ahead and address those. Hey, Kelly, you found your great-grandmother's death certificate on her husband's marriage record to his second wife. Excellent point. Okay. When a husband maybe was remarrying a second or third time, you will see the previous wife's death certificate to prove that he is eligible to be married. That's an excellent example. I hadn't seen that before. Stephanie says the birth year of her maternal grandfather's stone is wrong. The grandmother filled it out that way. And your mom didn't realize it was wrong until you pointed it out in 50 years later. Oh gosh, 50 years after he died. Yeah, absolutely. I see misspellings a lot times too on gravestones. I've seen where my great-great-grandfather's, his first and middle name are switched and backwards. Hey, Debbie. She's from Big Bear Lake, California. I actually got to meet Debbie out at Roots Tech. It was really lovely to meet my readers out there when I was in Salt Lake City. Okay, so the newspaper is certainly a source. Another thing, and this was so fascinating, funeral home or mortician records. Now, I've mentioned these before, and yes, they can be hard to find, but I had a really interesting conversation just this past weekend at a genealogy meeting where I was speaking, and a young woman came up and told me she was from a small town, and she happened to know the morticians in town. And she started researching her family, and she asked them and said, hey, do you guys have any records? And they took her down into their basement, and they had boxes and boxes. And she said they were able to pull out for the family that she was looking for, and she was able to read those funeral home records. It's sometimes hard to find, and that's a special case because she actually knew the person. But do you have connections to the local funeral homes? It never hurts to contact them. And that's exactly what she told me. She said, it doesn't hurt to contact them. Some are going to be more willing than others. I think part of it might depend on how long ago the event happened. So that could be an issue when it comes to the privacy laws these days. And then the other issue is that oftentimes they are not microfilmed. They are in boxes in storage somewhere. So that can present an issue. I loved her comment. She said, but you know what? She said, if I hadn't asked, he couldn't have told me yes. If I hadn't have asked, I wouldn't have known they existed. And so it was a great way to go about finding funeral home records. So I thought I'd share that with you guys. Sexton records or the cemetery office records are other good places to look. I've had a really interesting experience with that myself when I called up to a Pennsylvania cemetery several years ago and got somebody at the office, and I told them who I was. They were kind of entertained the fact that I would call from North Carolina to ask about their records. And he said, you know what? He said, we're kind of bored right now, which was a good thing considering it was a cemetery. He said, who are you looking for? And I heard I could hear him tapping away on the keyboard. He goes, oh yeah, here it is right here. And he was able to answer all my questions and confirm what I had thought. So it was a really interesting way to do that. What I can tell you about cemetery records, though, is they can be hard to find, but don't be discouraged. I've actually had to go to town offices or county offices to ask who is in charge of particular cemeteries in order to track down who has the records and where their records will be. So I've actually gone that far and have had good success. I don't have to do that often, but when I have, it has been very fruitful for my research, and that's been a good thing. So I would encourage you to do that. Either reach out, and if you can, I actually just showed up at the reception desk because I couldn't get an answer to my email. So it wasn't that far away. So I just drove down there, and they were happy to have me there and help me. So just a little tip there. The other place that we talk about finding dates of death sometimes we talk about church records. But what happens when you have a church that didn't necessarily keep great records or those records don't exist? Consider the other things such as like newsletters that might be kept once a year. Oftentimes in some churches, you will see a newsletter come out around All Hallows Saints. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. All Hallows Saints Day. And they will have a list of everybody in the congregation who has passed away within the past year. And churches can have years and years of these newsletters still in their archives. So it might behoove you to contact the church and see if you can thumb through those around the appropriate years to see if you can find out when somebody died. You may not get the exact date, but if you can at least get the year. Sometimes for us as genealogy researchers, sometimes this is as good as it gets, but it can also be a clue and help narrow down our focus as well. Hey, Peggy. Oh, another Californian. Glad to have you. So those are some thoughts when it comes to looking at church records. It might not be that formal record. It might be more likely to be like newsletters and those kinds of things. Of course, don't forget the mortality schedules that you can find from like 1850 to 1880. So don't forget to check those. Sometimes early in my research, I confess, I would forget to look at those and have to backtrack a little bit. So just make sure you're checking those. And then, of course, city directories. You guys have heard me talk a lot about city directories when it comes to finding all kinds of stories. And I love to talk about city directories. Yes, you can kind of determine a time period for when somebody has passed away. So if your ancestor was made, the head of the household and he dies, and then his wife starts showing up as a widow. So in 1 year, he is the head of the household or listed as the primary resident. And then the next year, his wife with the term widow shows up beside her name. Well, within that year, you can make an assumption that he has passed away. And then you can narrow your search down for those other confirmation for his date of death. But here's another way to use city directories. We talked about trying to find funeral home records or church newsletters, those kinds of things. But what if you don't know what the funeral homes were in the area? What if you don't know which cemeteries are in the area? Use the city directories for that time period. They will list out oftentimes all the cemeteries or all the churches or all the the funeral homes, the businesses. You can actually get a business directory sometimes for the larger cities. That will help you identify the possibilities. And that sometimes is half the battle, is determining what the possibilities are of where to look. So I would use the city directories in that particular way as well. Okay, guys, that's a lot of places to look for that date of death. Again, if you know of places, if you research non-US places and you have ideas for that, I would love to hear where you might find records. So, or perhaps how the UK refers to certain records, if they refer to their death records in a different terminology. If you have experience research in German or any of the European, really anywhere for the death records, that would be very helpful to everyone as we go. Because I would like to, I know I have a lot of readers who are non-US or not from North America. And so it would be helpful to be able to clue everybody in when it comes to finding these dates of death, because it is possible. Hey, Sherry, up from Charleston, West Virginia. Yay. All right, guys. So if you want to see more information, go to the post. I've got it in the links in the chat down below, and you can check it out a little closer there. I do have other articles there as well. You might be interested in one. Guys, I love cemetery research, so you might want to check out a couple that I've written on cemeteries as well over on the website. Will be very interesting. Other than that, I think everything's kind of going. I think I'm finally getting back on track after getting home from Roots Tech, guys. It's been a whirlwind getting back and getting caught up on sleep and just daily life, from being away for so long. And I hope everybody is staying healthy these days as the news each day talks more and more about the coronavirus and more and more things are being canceled. The good news is I'm here in the virtual world, so you guys can always access the genealogy and access me virtually, so you can keep moving forward in your genealogy research. All right, guys, have a great day. I will be here next week. We'll have another Facebook Live next Thursday. Would love it if you would share this. If you found this helpful or have a genealogy research buddy that you think would enjoy this video, please feel free to share it. I would love to help other people out as well, because my focus here at Are You My Cousin, whether it's on doing Facebook Lives or the YouTube channel or the website, is really to help take some of the overwhelm out of your genealogy research, get you thinking a little more creatively with your research, and really just keep you moving forward with your research so that you can hopefully break down some of those brick walls. Hey, Debbie. Yes, Debbie agrees that Roots Tech was amazing and truly a whirlwind. It was. Absolutely. And you are most welcome, Debbie. One tip I'll tell you guys, this is completely off topic, but so Roots Tech was fabulous. I know a lot of people did not get to go, but they have their keynote speakers. You can watch the videos in full about the keynote speakers over at the Roots Tech website. I think it's rootstech.org. They had some fabulous keynote speakers, and I think you would find them very interesting. So as you are spending more and more time inside, as more and more things are being canceled, I would encourage you to go over there and give those a listen. They are incredibly uplifting, and I think you would enjoy them. All right, guys, I will see you next week here in Facebook Live. Every other time, I'll see you over on the website or on the YouTube channel. Have a great day, guys. Bye.